What does it mean to be critical? You guys have an answer for that? What does that mean? Anybody? Any definition for critical? Like, what's it mean to you?
Shouldn't fail.
Huh?
Shouldn't fail. That's really important.
It's related to that. Yeah, it can mean that. Like, it's about to. It's very important. You know, it's like this one thing will break everything. It's critical, right? And so, what I wanted to do is, like, when we talked about the development process last week, I didn't talk about one of the biggest things, which is creating the tests, and then actually doing the tests. And in order to do the tests, you have to do another process, but we'll talk about that later. I'll just write it down. It's called a UE FMEA, and this part is defined once again in the standards that I talked about last year, or last week, E and C. God, these are always so hard to remember. Okay, HE75. So if you really want to like read the actual definition of how this shit works, because I'm just going to kind of wing it, mold to make it easy to talk about, but like the actual steps are here. And this stands for use error, failure modes, and effects analysis. And what that is to, first of all, you have to like evaluate the concept based on 3 different criteria, which are, let's see, severity, occurrence, and detection. And this is all very like engineering, boring stuff. Better, I can't spell. Occurrence and detection. Okay, so the point of this is you need to have a very critical, think very critically about your project, whether in the example last week we were talking about medical products and how as engineers and designers and researchers, when we were working on the project, we had to spend a significant amount of time doing research to understand how this product could go wrong, how it could be manufactured wrong, how the user could use it wrong, in order to make a mind map, an understanding of where the risk is. And then that will tell us where we should put our effort as a design team, as an engineering team. Like this thing is going to happen all the time, it has incredible severity, we can detect it, let's put all our effort into that. You know, if there's and then if you go through issues, that would be like in the hemodialysis machine, that would be the example of, you know, you're taking blood out of the person, having the machine clean it, and then put it back into you. It's very severe when the person's sleeping and they move, that the lines don't come out while they're sleeping, because that would kill them. Not a good thing. So you basically create a big chart of all the different things. It's a really boring Excel spreadsheet, and it goes something like, you know, severities in this direction, occurrences in this direction, and you basically say, you know, here is thing 1 that could happen, thing 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you end up having a chart that looks a little bit like this, kind of this grid, and you have sort of in this cross line zone, you have a point of like an inflection point that says this has a high occurrence and a high severity, and we can detect it enough. These are the things we're going to focus on. Here are a bunch of things that are impossible to detect, but have a high severity, but we can't do anything about it if we can't detect it. So you can follow this actual protocol to really understand what's happening, but just understand that you're trying to systematize in sort of not in an objective way what the risks are, what you can do about it, and if there is anything to do about it. Because if there's a risk that's hard, you can't do anything about it, whatever. But you can create sort of a framework for you to evaluate those things. So the question then becomes, what are the things that you can do once you find that there is a problem and you want to address it. There's different like hierarchies of mitigations. So for like, and they normally start with identifying the problem first and saying, you know, when the blood comes out of the patient while they're sleeping, that's really bad. We identify that. What can we do? We can either design it out. You can spend like a lot of engineering and effort and to like make a perfectly, just make it so that there's a new technology where the blood doesn't have to leave the body. You know, like you go, oh, okay, like how about we have the machine actually inside the body so they can move around as much as they want. You know, so that's the best answer. But there are fundamental, you know, things we live with, like, you know, things have to be a certain size, have to have energy, they have to have waste, you know. So you can't do that. So we're not going to design out that problem. But we can maybe automate it. That's pretty good. So then you can make it so that you have like a intermediary step between the end user getting their blood withdrawn into the machine, and then you can have like sensors, and you can detect it, and you can sort of automate it. And so then, or you can have, in our instance, we created a device that is what we would call a normally closed fluid loop system, which is essentially to say, like, if the mechanically, if the tubes get unplugged or whatever, it will automatically close itself because it's normally in a normally closed state. So then the failure mode is the safe mode. That's what you're trying to fix. So then you kind of automate it, you know, do things like that. The next thing you can do is basically you sort of do training. You say, okay, well before that you have like a supervisor, right? You can like, well, let's fix this problem. We'll have a person stand next to the person every night while they sleep, and then we'll be able to like, they'll just watch it. And, like, that'll be kind of safe. Like, there's other problems with that, but not ideal. And then maybe you could like you can do what's called training. It's like you have that supervisor train them how to like look for these issues. The next and probably the last thing is called labeling, and this is what is often the thing that companies do the most, and is not actually a mitigation. It's just a legal mitigation. But labeling is basically don't use this, you could die. And it's like not a problem anymore. But that's not acceptable if you're doing certain products generally. So the other thing that we can do is we can sort of try and mitigate it through not exactly any of these functions, but we can help to maybe reduce the severity, or we can help to reduce the occurrence by having a redesign. We set a baseline and say, with this existing technology, when they use this thing, they tend to fail X amount of time. You can create a test, and then you do a redesign, and you try to replicate that, and then you say, well, it had a better design that was more intuitive. We got rid of all the crap that was like all the functions that were unnecessary. They had just one button to press, and that's the only button they can press, and they press the button, and it always works. Versus the time before when they had every option in the world, and they didn't know what to do, so then they pressed the wrong button, right? So if you streamline the whole operation through good design, which is actually a cost problem, because now you're inherently limiting the functionality of your machine to be more streamlined, because that's the trade-off. But you can do design, I guess. You can do testable design. It's the most important. Is the key word there. And in testable design, you have different sort of avenues of approach, because what you're trying to do is say, with product A, it has this certain threshold of whatever, and how do we remove that or lower that threshold of error? And you can address that normally through codes, and well, actually it's just codes. Codes are just a fancy way of grouping together different ways of communicating information between the machine and the person. So obviously you can have a literal screen that has a code, like, you know, alphanumeric stuff. That's one way. You can, but then this actually leads to the problem of multifunctionality, so it's not like direct, because you can have a branching path and in logic there, so that gets can be a little confusing. But you can do different codes to communicate, which are color, shape, texture, priority, essentially all the artistic design things, where if you design the product in a way where it's a very hierarchical flow of visual information that is communicated in multiple ways of what it is what its use is. So if you have, what you don't have, like if you have the switchboard in front of you, you want, if this is the button that like launches the missiles versus this button that feeds the dog, you want to have those as distinct as possible. So you want them to have different colors, you want them to have different shapes, you want them to have different actions. So you want to think about like, well, even if I'm not looking at it and I push it this way, will it activate it? So you can have a different sort of modality of changing its state, so that you have to rotate one versus pushing one. So, but if you can use good design and aesthetics and understanding human cognition, you will be able to create a product that will perform better against in different testing scenarios. And I think the last thing I would say, that's it. Any questions?